Okay. Here with Joe Loughlin from Balleek, and we're going to do an interview, Joe, about your memories and about your knowledge of living here in Balleek, growing up and on the border. Joe, tell us a couple of things about what it was like growing up in this area along the border.
Well, you accepted the border. Like, I was born in 1932, and the border was very young that time. But we lived over in the south bank of the. Although my father was born here, who we are now, but he got a house over there when he married, and bit that like. But you accepted the border. You grew up with it. It's the same as the church or the post office or anything else. Like, But when we left our house to go to school in Balleek, we had to walk through a portion of Donegal, which was neutral at that time, and that was no problem to us, at all. A lot of to give you a wee incident during the Second World War, when they started to build the aerodromes, there's a lot of labour supplied from here to bring them up to Killidees and Castlearstill, and they transported those by British Army lorries and drivers. There was a driver and a guard in each lorry. And those two soldiers, my mother kept lodgers, and they were lodged in our house. But those two of the leading families who might have other views refused to billet the British soldiers, because they were afraid at that time that Germany would win the war, and if they had billeted soldiers, they would be shot as collaborators. That's hard to believe.
That's probably a real fear.
And when the Americans came to a radio station about 3 miles out the road here later on in the war, they were billeted with
Can you go, girl?
she can sit in here beside me. They were billeted with a Cleary family, so there you had like two nationalist Catholic families billeting the Allied soldiers. Like, that's kind of hard to credit, And then the other people that refused to billet them, when the war was over in D-Day, they were the first people to have their flags flying in the houses. But that's the way it went,
And you were growing up with an older brother, was there?
That's right.
Yeah.
We were 8 in our family altogether, okay. And so we had a good life. Like, but you accepted the border for what it was, and you grew up with it. And
Your brother had an experience on the border, didn't he, when he was young?
yeah, it might have been one of the soldiers that I speak about at the time, who gave him 2 pennies. He got on his bicycle, cycled across the border, which was only a couple of 100 yards, to a wee shop up there, bought himself a packet of Rolo sweets. Like, sweets were rationed here in Northern Ireland, they weren't the Free State. And as he came down to the bottom of the hill, the Free State customs man came out and stopped him, Larry Fagan, and took the sweets from him.
Took his Rolo off?
Took his Rolo off him and kept him and sent him home.
And why did he take the Rolo off him?
He was trying to be bloody officious. You could understand it if it was a British customs person, no, but it was the Irish customs guy. And this Larry Fagan guy, like, he was the pillars of society in Ballyshannon, leader of the church, leader of the drama, leader of everything. Like, well, what he did that tells you what he really was.
He took a packet of Rolo off a child.
Of the child.
Because he couldn't import it into
He's supposed to. There would have been, shouldn't have been any restrictions. Like, he abused his position, like, and I'd never forgive him for it. Like, I know about anybody else.
What do you think he did with the Rolo?
He ate it. Or if he had kids who was owned, brought it home and give it to them. It should have been, any confiscated goods should be handed into the headquarters and disposed of or whatever. But that's the sort of stuff that some of those guys were political appointments, and they were full of their own importance. That's some of them were all right, but the British customs were far more tolerant.
And during at that time and during the war, as a child, you witnessed other things happening across the border. I think you witnessed maybe some of the airmen who had died being repatriated back to the north.
Yeah, no matter where there was principally flying boats, and there were, as a matter of interest, there were 200 recorded plane crashes in the Free State during the Second World War. Some British RAF, some American, some German, and all. And a friend of mine, Dennis Burke, who's attached to Dublin Airport, and he compiled a complete list of all those crashes, including where it happened, where the names of the crews, those who died and those who survived, like an amazing record. But no matter where they crashed, that'd be down in County Kerry, Cork, and in fact I had helped a woman whose dad was killed in a crash in Kerry. I helped her to visit the grave and get the story of the crash. Like, and the local people there, they were doing the first on the scene, along with the LDF, which was a sort of a part-time army, and they had recovered the bodies, assisted by the Irish Army. They were placed in coffins, brought up to the border in covered trucks, that time 2 or 3 coffins to each truck, and handed over then to the RAF with full military honours. As a kid I was cycling about and seeing this happening, and went there, they had a chaplain given the last rites, the bugler given sounding the last post. The Irish Army men to put the coffins on their shoulders, marched them down to the border, handed them over to the RAF, where the Union flag was placed on them, and the 9 or 10 coffins. There were a couple of occasions this happened now. They were placed on an open low-loader truck, a big 60-foot truck, 9 or 10 coffins with the flags on them. I thought it was a bit undignified to drive from here to Everton where they're buried in open trucks like that. And there are 80 war graves in the Church of Ireland Church in Evertonstown. Some RAF, some Australian, some Canadian, New Zealand, all that. And in the Catholic one, there's 12 then buried there. And I've had families to visit the graves of their loved ones. Actually, in 1944, when I was a kid here, helped my uncle with the hay on the 12th of August. When I saw it, I went that way there with the smoke pouring out of the engine. It crashed behind a hill over there, and of course I held across the mountain. It got there about an hour, and there were 3 lads. 3 of the lads died, and 9 survived due to the skill of the pilot. And there's one of those crew, Chuck Singer. He was a Canadian. He's still living in America, and I keep in touch all the time. Okay. We actually had him over here and his son on the anniversary of the crash to visit the. And it's all on television. Like there were about 200 people there to welcome him, you know. So rather amazing. Paul Clark is covered with television and all that sort of thing. And one of the you might have heard of him, of course. Everybody has the late Bishop Edward Delia Derry, and he as a kid he had cycled out there. And when we had Chuck back, we had Bishop Edward back to meet him again after all those years. Like that was very touching and emotional. And I had a contact with the Irish Army camp in Finner Camp between Bleak and Ballyshan and Shawnee Curran. He was a commandant in there, and he arranged the Irish Army to be there. He arranged a helicopter to fly past and all that sort of thing. That's great.
So are the folk buried in Irvinstown looked after by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission?
If you ever got a chance to see it, the local people, like the Commonwealth people, put up the headstones, and they're kept immaculately. And each Remembrance Sunday, the graves are tidied up, wee crosses with the wooden crosses with the Union flag placed on all the graves again. Also, they're kept perfectly. And a lot of the RAF lads who were returned to their families in England, you know, so. And Americans who were killed in crashes, and there were quite a number of those, they were buried up near Belfast somewhere. And then some years ago, the families were given the chance of having the bodies exhumed and brought back to America. But quite a number of them said, no, we leave them where they are with their comrades.
And in Irvinstown, are they Protestants and Catholics buried together in the cemetery, or
no? They wore dog tags, and any of them were Church of England or any of the Protestant churches were buried in the Church of Ireland cemetery. Okay. About 70 of them, and any of them who were Catholic were buried in the Catholic cemetery.
And were there any that people couldn't determine whether they were Protestant and Catholic, and what happened to them?
There was only one that I know of that I crashed down in Mayo, where a young lad dog tag was missing. So according to this rules, the church were wrong in many things in the past and still are. He was buried outside the local cemetery in County Mayo until about 8 or 10 years ago. A new curate was appointed to the parish, and he was looking around, he seen this, and he says, why is this? And he was told, he says, we'd sort that problem. He got the wall knocked down, built it out around the grave, with the result that young RAF lad is, with a headstone on his grave, like he's buried with the rest of the community. Oh. So that's, it shows like, we Irish have a sense of humour, like, but we have a way of solving problems that are really Christian. Yeah. I think really Christian.
Well, I think that's a lovely story. So we have in your memories in the Second World War of people north and south in very adverse circumstances during the war, treating each other with a lot of respect. The colour parties coming from the south with airmen who have died and being handed over to the north, and then people being buried and so on in a very respectful way. Eventually, even with the one person who didn't have the dog tag. I want to go back to then 20 years before that, to that period of 1912 to 23, where there wasn't a great deal of respect at times. And you don't have direct memories of things like the Battle of Pettigo, but you have memories handed down to you, and you've done some work on it. Tell us a little bit about what happened.
I helped... I have books here that I'll show you. You'll probably be able to get copies of them. I helped Dan Downing, who was from Kerry actually, but his wife was at flood from Pettigo. Dan died since, and the book was published then after he died. Actually, his wife would have been a cousin of Dr. Edward Daly's that I speak about. One thing about Dr. Edward Daly, like when he was after retired, if you wanted to interview him about something, and I sent people to him, he would say, okay, Peter, you be with me at 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and we'll do the interview. And after about an hour, you would say, now I think, Doctor, I've taken up enough of your time. It's time to go. Oh no, Edward said, I've left this afternoon completely free for you. You're to stay. He's a great man for the media people. Great man for the media people. Terrific. But I helped Dan Downing and he produced this book on the Battle of Pettigo.
And just for people who don't know, Pettigo's just across the border from Balik, so they're really close.
Pettigo, I'll show you here on the map here. You have Pettigo here. This section of Fermanagh here, that's north of the river, bordering Donegal, and that meant that if any of the army or military or police wanted to go into Fermanagh, they wanted to avoid them passing through the Free State. So they got this bridge built here, that's Roscar Bridge, you can see it there.
Oh, yes.
And the Bow Island then had to have, there was a small island here, and then 3 bridges in the Bow Island, which meant that the personnel from Balik could travel there into the Northern without passing through the Free State.
So the Roscar Bridge is actually quite a weak bridge, isn't it? It's not
part of it was bombed by the so-called IRA Republicans during the present troubles,
Right. Okay.
But the man that got them got those bridges built, like the border was set up in 22. He got those bridges built in 1926. That's just 2 years. And if you imagine, if you wanted to build any wee thing or do any change to your house, you have to apply for planning permission, and you'd be lucky if you get it through in 5 or 6 years' time. His influence was so strong to the very highest levels that he got those bridges built. He would have been he was very influential in the Masons.
And just so that people know that
So that he could get direct to London and got the government to build those bridges.
and just so that people know who are listening to this, who can't see the map, that up until these bridges were built, if the British Army or the RUC or the B Specials wanted to move from one part of Fermanagh to another, they would have to drive through a portion of what was then the Irish Free State.
Free State.
And they did do that until these bridges were built.
No, they didn't do that. The bridges were built to avoid that. Okay.
Right.
And then that was the official way then how they would get from Bleak to the rest of the 6 counties without.
Okay.
But in actual fact, as I said to you earlier on, there was a portion of the Free State from Bleak Bridge that we passed through going to school and back to church or back and forward, and that was there. But in actual fact, if the police or the army or the Leman or the Home Guard wanted to cross over, they went through there. And looking at this from the view of the troubles we've been through and what had happened, but they actually walked through there, no problem whatsoever. And when the Home Guard was formed during the war, there was an ex-army man living in Bleak who had reached the exalted rank of a Lance Corporal dispatch rider in the First World War. And when the Home Guard was found, he was elevated to captain of the Home Guard, and he became known thereafter as captain, which was much more honourable rank. But they could go through there, no problem. Like the Republican movement, was probably dead at the time, and they didn't create any problem at all. There was a wee fella named Willie McBride who worked in a shop in Bleak. He wouldn't have a great way with him. Willie went home, got his tea, joined his, put on his B-man's uniform, shouldered his 303 rifle and marched down Bleak Street through the Free State over to Slater's Cross to be picked up by the lorry gathering them up. And these are the things. The head constable Briggs, who lived beside where I lived in the early stages of my life, he lived in Curry on the Fermanagh part of the border, and if he wanted to go across to the barrack in Bleak, he just put on his uniform, a Sam Brown belt, marched through the Free State over and took up his duties in the barrack. Nobody interfered with him. So I'm sure it's hard for you to credit that, considering what we've been through with the troubles and the activities of the Republican movement.
And there's a story you've been told about and read about where a member of the IRA, a local Republican who was on the run, was spotted and was walked across the border by...
Yeah, there was a police constable, Holmes, he was rather difficult, officious guy to put it, and where he lived over a barber shop, he could have viewed the Bleak Bridge and all that sort of thing. He also rented a bit of land of a local lady over in the Curry, in the south in Fermanagh, kept a cow there and put in spuds, and he didn't see, there was one of the few, in my opinion, genuine Republicans, Eddie Slevin, who was on the run in the Free State. He come across early in the morning, they went in to dig spuds for his 2 sisters. Holmes spotted him and arrested him. And it's as clear as if it was happening today. As a kid going to school, I could they came on the road, me going to school. Holmes had a gabardine coat over the uniform, his hand in here, probably with a revolver pointed at Eddie. And Eddie handcuffed to him and marched him to the Free State.
Through the Free State and across the border?
Over to the police barracks. That's hard, but I can see that the same as it happened today. In fact, he was transferred later on to Kesh and then retired. He was from Westbrook, and unfortunately about 30 years ago, he was that bad in article that he shot to his own family and shot himself. And that was in the local paper. I was sorry I never kept the record of it, but that's the way it happened,
Okay.
So some sad things happen.
Well, and while those sort of things were happening, there were then specific incidents, and the Battle of Pettigo was one of those incidents, which happened in 1922.
2022, yeah.
Tell us a bit about
And the Battle of Balleek. Both Pettigo and Balleek were shelled. Churchill was a government minister at the time, and he set up guns about 3 miles up the Enniskillen Road, and the IRA were on the Battery Fort at the time, and he shelled Balleek and the Battery Fort. And the people with the shelling and with the troubles, they got out of Balleek and for safety. And like some of the Protestant members, I think they got a boat and got up the river. But the so-called Republicans, what did they do? They burned the Protestant, they raided the Protestant shops and stole the stuff out of it. And then they burned the books that had the record of what they owed them. And these were Republicans. So you have a fair idea what my mind is. So Churchill also set the shelling of Pettigo too as well. Like it's amazing, you know.
And there was an IRA unit, and there were presumably then, what would it then been, RUC members as well as the British Army involved, were there?
Well, in the 1920s, the RIC,
right,
the Royal Irish Constabulary, and the British Army involved. Like the British Army were based in the fort overlooking the Bridge of Balleek there, right. And they eventually moved out then. But there were 3, I think, Republicans shot in Pettigo at that time. There's a memorial in the Pettigo Main Street up to their memory.
Okay. Yeah. And there was one man shot in an armoured car who was...
that was over at, we call it Slater's Cross, near where I lived, right. Just right beside it. And there were Republicans they had control of the fort that time. And more by chance, they fired a shot, and it happened to go through this peephole, and the army lad was there, and he was looking out the peephole, and he was shot. And his body remained there for a couple of days until, through negotiations with the Republicans and others, 2 local ladies, and she was later Mrs. Ross, and she was Knox was her maiden name, and her and another lady went over and recovered the body and brought it to Balleek and given the respect it deserved.
So the body was left in the armoured car for just 2 days. Nobody could get at it.
Nobody could get at it, like. So the Republicans agreed to allow the 2 ladies to take the bodies there and bring them over. You know, Again, a moving story.
Absolutely. And then there was a slightly more funny story, I think, at the time, where there was a B special who was caught in no man's land. Is that in the same battle?
That was in Pettigo.
That was in Pettigo.
Pettigo, yeah. And they allowed him,
the
Republicans allowed him to run across, you know. And when that Dan Dowling's book was made public, I had a contact from a lady in up North Antrim, and an uncle of hers was shot at that time by the Republicans in Pettigo.
Right.
So I had been in contact with her for quite a while, you know, and able to give her the information she wanted, you know.
Mm-hmm. And the IRA made their escape, I think, did they? But they had to go on a ferry, and there was a price to pay. Have I got that right?
No, there was a Morhamini castle out here, which belonged to the Johnson family, and when the last of the family lost their lives in 1917, right. the old Morhamini castle was sold and was purchased by the diocese, and old Father O'Kieran took up residence there. He was the parish priest. So that would have been the story there. Like, and when he was there, the specialists took over thing and held him captive. And then there was a lady, she had a boat, Pride of Erin, and she came into her boat, and the specialists that were in Morhamini Castle went across the fields into the shore, and she took them up to Enniskillen again. Okay. Another funny story of Father O'Keir, and as an adult I used to serve Mass from, I knew him quite well, way back in the 1930s, and he, very strong Republican. He was reputed to be both personal friend of both De Valera's and Michael Collins, which he was actually at the time. On the way back during the war and the blackout, there's this very officious policeman who was cycling up the Enniskillen Road. There were no buses that time, but he looked across the river and seen a wee glimmer of light in Loughlin Castle. Pedalled across the bridge, or Score Bridge, knocked at the door, and old Father O'Kieran eventually came to the door with his candle in his hand at night. And people would have expected him, being a Republican, to chase you, man. And the man gave a complete lecture, like on this light, the danger would be if the Germans seen it and would bomb the place. And old Loughlin says, "Oh my good man," he said, "we can't have that." He says, "Come with me." Brought him away to the castle, the very far end of it, where he had a candle burning, preparing his sermon for the following Sunday. He blew out that candle and blew out the one he had in his hand. Now he says, "My good man, you can get your way out." You know, the humour that we have, like, it keeps us going. You know?
There was something about and the IRA unit who were in exchanges between Pettigo and Belik, and they were withdrawing and had to go on a ferry, but the ferryman demanded a fee for it. Is that right? Was it £25?
No, that's, again, this is where you get the record straight. Belik Barracks was raided in 1921-22. Right. And at that time, practically all our IC lads were Catholics. And they would have been at Mass. And the local section, I remember well, Joe Slevin, he locked the doors of the church so they wouldn't get out. And he, with another group, and they got an ambulance out of the Free State, and they raided the barracks and took all the guns and ammunition out of it. And then they set fire to it, but the fire wasn't very successful. They went up to the shores of Lough Melvin, where there was a class Republican from County Leitrim with his boat ready to shift the guns and ammunition across to Leitrim, and he wouldn't move anything until he got £25 into his hand. And a friend of mine, and he was one of the few genuine Republicans that I knew, Sean Carty, he was part of the team. He had a cycle into Garrison Village, borrowed £25 and give it to this strong Leitrim Republican before he shifted the guns.
So the guns were sitting there waiting for this guy to cycle into town, get £25 and cycle back
again. Pay this Leitrim man in case the army would have overtook them and rescued them. So it gives you an idea of the loyalty or royalty of some Republicans. And Sean told me that story himself. Sean Carty told me that story himself. Like that it wasn't the British Army that happened. It was the with the Republicans. That's why I'd be rather sceptical about a lot of those guys.
Joe, tell us a little bit of some of the smuggling stories that you know of, or you remember, or that you've been told about by friends and family. And I know you've quite a few of them there. So I'm minded about your brother who had his Rolo taken off a few years later. But when in 1921, when the customs posts started to come into being after partition and so on, those customs posts, of course, had different opening hours, north and south. But there were different ways.
The British customs were open from 8 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock at night. Then they closed down. But the other. The Irish customs posts, they would be open from the morning until. And if you wanted to cross the border with your car, you had to get somebody. You had to get a bailsman to bond you, to get a pass to go across the border. Actually, I think the full details of that is in the museum in Enniskillen. The type of book you needed and the bailsmen and all that sort of thing. So that was fairly. It is an interesting period, but we grew up and we accepted it,
Tell us how Mr. Duffy got his nickname.
Oh, the Ghost Duffy, yeah. He lived between Garrison and Belcoo, like along the border up there, you see. And he was smuggling cattle one night, and this policeman was on the scene and seized the cattle. And Duffy got on his bicycle, cycled over the mountain into Enniskillen, and booked into a lady who had kept lodgers for the night. And when the case came up in the Belik courthouse, and it was over the or UC barracks that we mentioned earlier is up on the top floor, and he was right there. So the evidence given, and this lady from Enniskillen gave genuine, true evidence that Mr. Duffy had spent the night in her house and he couldn't possibly have been there. So the case was dismissed. So somebody asked the policeman, "Are you sure that there was Duffy you seen? That with those kids?" Well, if it wasn't him, it was just a ghost. And I knew Duffy, like, and I knew his daughter used to fix bicycles for them, you know. Again, the sort of things that you see during the economic war in the 1930s when De Valera, when the big landowners in the Free State, where the people are given the right to buy their farms and all, and De Valera stopped sending the money over to England, and England then refused to take the cattle from Ireland over, and a bullock that was worth £20 could be bought in the Free State for £5, and was smuggled across then, where it was worth £20. At that time, £15 is a lot of money, so a lot of people made a lot of money. Actually, there was one character, another bit of Irish humour. He had the name of Miles Sweeney, who would have lived in my time, you know, and he was caught by the Free State authorities in smuggling cattle. And he opted to be tried not in the district court, but in the county court by a judge and jury. And if you can imagine, like, a jury of Leitrim men were not going to find one of their mates guilty, and he was found innocent, and his cattle returned to him.
You have to know the system.
You have to know the system. But he was a character.
So Duffy was known as Ghost Duffy.
Ghost Duffy then from that. The policeman said, "This is how he got his name." I knew him very well, you know.
And it wasn't just the men, it was women who did some of the smuggling.
Oh, they did some of the smuggling too as well.
There's a lovely story at the time that you have about a lady who had a guest house in Bundoran.
Oh, that's right. And she was very, very so-called strong Republican family, and she was a native of Dungannon. And that time they would travel by train. When the GNR was going, you could get a 6 o'clock train in Ballyke in the morning, take you to either Dublin or Belfast, do a full day's business and be back in Ballyke at 9 o'clock at night. But she would travel from Bundoran up to Cookstown. And the poor old dear, like, she kept one of these old crockery hot water bottles to keep it warm. And when the customs men inspected these trains at Ballyke border, the British Customs, you know, that had great sympathy for the old lady with a hot water bottle. When she got up to Dungannon, the hot water bottle was full of whiskey. And it was emptied out and dried out, and then tea, which was very scarce in the Free State, the hot water bottle was filled with the tea leaves and smuggled by again. So, again, can you beat the Irish for finding a solution to a system?
And I love the story, if I've got the name right, of Thady John. Was it Thady John?
Oh, he had one of these engines.
Tell us the name properly. And
Thady John McLowan, and he had one of these engines you could put in the back wheel of a bicycle, to an ordinary push bike, and he had to have somebody to cross the border. He had somebody to act as bailsman for him to ensure that that he would renew the pass every 12 months. When the time came, then renew it. The engine had given trouble, so Thady John got someone from the Irish Customs to cancel the ban. And he put the bits of the thing in the back, and he put them in. He says, "There you are. Now there's your engine. You can do what you like with
it." He just said, "There you go," and give them all the parts.
All the thanks. Yeah, they were the stories like that. Were fun. I helped other people on this Pedigo business too as well. Like if customs, that time you've heard of Loughlin and the pilgrimage to Loughlin, and with the border, if cars were coming from the west and going to make the pilgrimage through Ballyke, heading for Pedigo, the portion of the north that they passed through was considered a concession road, and those cars were permitted to travel to Pedigo, but they were not permitted to stop anywhere on that. They didn't need a pass or anything like that. But there was an old character, Johnny McCabe, who was quite a character. He was a gifted carpenter, like, and he could build cartwheels, and with they all had to be exactly done. And he probably couldn't write his name, but still he was brainy enough to build a cartwheel. But Johnny had a Ford car, and didn't the wires get mixed up in it, and he couldn't get it started. So Johnny went out and stood in the brick street and watched out for this traffic coming from the west of Ireland until he'd seen an exact model of a Ford as his coming up the street. And outside stopped it. Hey, Sonny, he says, can you pull in a minute? He says, and would you open up the bonnet? He looked at the way the wires were fixed in the Loughlin car and his own, and replaced the wires they should be, started his car. Now he says, Sonny, away you go.
So you just stopped him in order to get some instructions from the car?
He looked at the way the wiring system was set on the plugs when the bonnet was open, and set his wires in the same way in his car, and that meant he could start his car.
And these concession roads started in 1921, and they were so that people couldn't stop to do smuggling. They couldn't stop or get out.
Yeah, the little portion now of the Free State, like that I speak about, that we're so familiar with.
Yeah.
The traffic from Balik, private traffic, was allowed to pass through that, but not stop in that particular area.
And that was just to stop them smuggling or to do something that...
Well, they wouldn't have been worried. It saved them the trouble of going the long journey way around over a Scar Bridge, you know. Complicated, you know, but we grew up with that, like, it's quite simple.
Yeah, it's different now, though, isn't it?
It's different now, like.
Well, are there any stories around the First World War that you would be aware of?
Well, during the First World War, 1914-18, I looked up, and there were about 12 local lads who served, joined the British Army and served in the First World War, but they all survived. They all survived, none of them died. And where they were, any of them were killed, like there was the War Memorial people put up their war grave at their graves.
Think about a lot of those young men who went out as well. They wouldn't have had a vote or anything like that in those days, either because they were under 21 or they didn't have property or whatever. So they were volunteering to go and fight in the war without any way of influence.
Yeah. And they were, as the situation, of course, in the Second World War was completely different, like, and they joined for various reasons, you know. There was so many plane crashes, like, you know, all over the place. And Breeds McCusker, myself, and my Irvinstown, like, we, along with other people, like, we put up memorial stones on the crash sites on both sides of the border. And we had families of the lads that were killed over. In fact, at the beginning of the month there, Breeds was honoured the Queen's birthday list with the BEN in honour of her work for the history of what was done in Fermanagh during the Second World War.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well deserved.
Something she very well deserved. She did a lot of. So we're sort of meandering about between the two wars.
Taking up a lot of your time.
No,
Any other things you want to any other memories or any other stories you have? I mean, we're focusing on 1912 to 23.
Yeah.
We can meander a wee bit beyond that.
And you'll probably be able to get these back in the library. And like, that's a good book there, taking note of that, Without a Dog's Chance.
All right. I haven't seen that one before.
You take a note of it there.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that I had, I think I told you that I donated it to the War Memorial in Talbot Street in Belfast, didn't I?
You did?
Yeah. If ever you wanted anything there, just go in and tell the girls who you are, what you are. Well, Maggie.
Looking a good girl. Actually,
I don't know whether you've ever seen that one or not.
will I turn these off now because we've finished, haven't we?
Yeah, unless you want to just have a note of these books.
Oh, I do want to know the books, yeah.
Yeah. We can just mention them in passing. And that's the one we've been talking about, Pettigo, the neighbours in Pettigo. It's very good. But all these would be available, like.
And just so that everybody's aware of these are books called, this one's Neighbours in Pettigo by Dan Downey,
Yeah,
and also the Birth of the Border by Cormac Moore.
yeah,
And the first one was Without a Dog's Chance by John Cousins.
that's right. And that one there,
This one is Ernie O'Malley's book, Interviews with the Northern Divisions, and it's called The Men Will Talk to Me. Are they the Northern Divisions in terms of the...
see, those Republicans wouldn't talk to everybody,
Yeah.
but these were people that, in fact, you see,
Is he related to Desi O'Malley?
probably would be. You see Sabra Aiken there down at the bottom, one of the authors.
Yeah.
Her granny is a sister of mine,
Oh, right, okay.
and her, my sister, you've heard of Frank Aiken, the Republican?
Of course, yes.
My sister Eileen is married to Frank Aiken's son. So there you are.
Republican royalty.
So that's
contradiction in
Sabra, like, is one of the co-authors of that book.
Okay.
And how they met, when my sister qualified as a teacher some years ago, she went out in voluntary work in Africa, and young Frank Aiken was out as an engineer working in a cathedral there, and he they met out there and they eventually got married. So,
Very good. Very good.
but again, like old Frank Aiken, like, was De Valera's right hand man, but like naturally when we got to know the two families, like he had a driver and they came to visit us, and like, they were married in Balik here.
I take her out.
Hey, Teresa, this is
I'm going to stop these now because they've taken up so much of your time.
Oh, it's okay, Mommy's back in bed now. She's on an antibiotic and I've given